There we are. So welcome everybody to the Secure the Village Technology and Security Management Happy Hour, where Barry Weber and I are going to be talking about Center for Internet Security version 8 of their controls that they just released a few weeks ago on that. Before we get started, let's go around the room. Everybody can say hello, who they are and whatever. I'm going to introduce Di Kriebel last because Di's our hostess for this. She's our sponsor for this group. I'll start with you, Steve.
Good afternoon, everyone. Steve Krantz. I'm a retired IBMer since 2007, and I'm on my third career. My second career was as a gay rights activist, and I'm still heavily involved with organizations, both national and local in Los Angeles, to promote the dignity and respect of the LGBTQ community. But my third career has been inspired by Stan. So I was trying to get my son more customers in his business to do computer service. So I said, let me teach. And what can I teach? I can teach cybersecurity to the seniors in my area. And that evolved into writing a couple of books. I wrote a book called Cyber Guardian, which I happily picked up the title from SecureTheVillage. And so my third career is participating with Stan on the SecureTheVillage board.
That's great. We're super glad you're here. I mean, you're part of the board and all of that. Stuart, you've been here now a couple of times. Yeah, good to see you.
This is just my second time here, and I'll probably be coming back on a regular basis. I'm in San Diego. I owned a consulting company back east for 19 years. Moved to San Diego in 2000 for a CIO position at a major healthcare company. Retired from there in 2011. And since then, I've been back in the consulting business. It took me 11 years to build up enough of a network to know people to get back into consulting. And so that's what I've been doing.
Super. Well,
most of my work now is in cybersecurity and privacy. I'm a certified privacy professional with OneTrust. So.
Very cool. Glad you found us. Glad you're with us. Andrew, if you want to turn on your video for a moment and again, say hello. Good to see you.
I'm actually on a machine where the video does not agree, unfortunately, with Zoom.
Oh.
I did just try it, but I do have audio, and good to be with the group again, Stan. And a brief background on myself. I'm the founder of Beauty Cloud, Inc., and we're a stealth startup doing distributed cloud storage. We have a number of exciting pilots getting underway in the next 30 to 90 days with an amazing array of applications.
Wow. I would want to know more of that. Drop me an email, Stan at SecureTheVillage. Yeah,
I absolutely will. We've, as you know, been working on our funding for quite some time. It appears we're in the near the finish line on our funding.
Wow, good for you. Good for you. Seema, let me ask you if you would tell us a bit about yourself also, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Seema Khan, and I'm working with a network services provider here in Bay Area. We are one of the network access control provider, and it's a enterprise level business. So I'm currently working in the information security team as a security analyst and privacy analyst. And Barry and I got connected through a common study group for privacy related certifications. So it's nice to be here, and I mean, CIS is not something new, so it would be interesting to know what is new in the version 8.
Well, super. As I said, just very glad you found us, you joined us, and we have a lot of programs. This is just being one of them. So please don't be a stranger. Definitely join with us as we have this objective of changing the world, securing the world. Barry, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, and I'll say a few words when we get started on the program. But let me go to Di Kriebel, who I said co-hosts this and is our sponsor. Di is always good about giving a little bit of insight into the state of the job market as well. So hi, Di, nice to see you again.
Hi, everybody, and I'm not going to go on camera. Not today. And it's kind of funny. So I told Stan yesterday that I had an opportunity. I'm friends with Hal Eisner, the Fox News guy. And so he texted me yesterday and he says, hey, do you want to go on camera and talk about the job market? Well, of course, right? Free advertisement. And so I get myself ready for the Zoom call, and his boss says, you know what? He wants me to focus on where I'm at in Azusa and find the job seekers themselves. I'm like, darn it. But, as we know in this, industry, so a little backtrack, Diane Crable-Delson, owner of DKKD Staffing, have been doing this for 20 years. I've worked with Stan for 20 years, placed most of the people at the company that acquired his, Miller Kaplan. And, I have a strong focus in IT and security, having quite the challenge finding enough security and network people, and they're not even applying. I mean, I have a CTO position that requires hands-on coding and not heavy in the security, and I have over 200 applicants. So it depends on the types of jobs, but one of the reasons I do events like this is to get the word out that I have job openings. So if you know people who are looking, tons of job openings, and I get new ones all the time. So please keep me in mind. I'm located in Westlake Village, California. I service mostly Southern California and across the United States, but the crux of it is in Southern California.
Well, super. We're truly grateful for your support. I mean, you've been with Secure the Village for as long as there's been a Secure the Village, and
right.
we're going on.
Love what you guys do, and it's just we're bringing everybody together. That's what it's about.
Thank you. It truly is. It's this community that's the whole vision of it. And I mean, the fact that Barry and I are doing this today is just another illustration of how. And I'm not sure, Barry, who introduced us, but it's the same. It's people we know, who people we know, who people we know, who people we know, and before you know it, you've got real community there, and you get the opportunity for the kind of synergies. I'm going to switch slide decks to this Barry, CIS Controls version 8. I want to launch a poll, and I'm new to polls, so let's see what happens. I made 2 poll questions. I'm launching them. I'm letting panelists vote. So Barry, you and I can vote. The first one is, how familiar are you with the Center for Internet Security? And are you seeing the polls?
Yeah.
Okay. You seeing one question or 2?
2.
Okay. Oh. Okay. Yeah, I see 2 people have voted. One person's voted on both questions. Okay. I'm going to guess, Barry, you implement the top 5 or top 6. That's you. I can't vote. I don't have a polling. So,
that's another one of these issues, state by state.
Right. But we got 2, 2, 1. Yeah, there we go. We're somewhat between a lot and somewhat knowledgeable, and implementing, well, the implementation goes all the way from not at all really formally all the way to implementing all the controls. So there's a wide variance there. And, in some way that's part of what we want, because as you're going to hear, as Barry and I are going to talk about this stuff, there's no one size fits all here. Ultimately there's how do you navigate this stuff? So I want to stop the polling. We just lost Andrew. Hopefully he'll be back in a moment. So there's the results sharing them. I'll leave that up for a minute. Barry, you want to give us a bit about who you are? Because we
Sure.
left that out. We also left out who I am, but I'll come to that in a moment. You first, if you will.
So I've been involved in IT from every aspect, from hardware vendor to software vendor to running programs across them, as well as leading IT organizations for decades. And it was about 5 years ago when, in fact, I was consulting, I was mentoring a consultant where I was a CIO and who was in networking. And I said, you know, if you want to do something and have long-term impact, you ought to be focused on security. And that was the virtual CIO role that lasted for like 4 years. I decided I was going to do the same thing and quickly migrated to focus specifically on implementation of security programs. And that took me to one engagement where I got heavily involved in implementation of GDPR and then got addicted to privacy. And as Stuart pointed out, you can't have privacy without security. You can have security without privacy, but the other way it doesn't work. And there's almost nothing you can do in the privacy space without ensuring that you're protecting it or knowing if it's been affected in the privacy space and reporting on data breaches and so forth. And that's where I've been for some time. I've had this interesting personal information relationship with CIS Controls for a number of years, where I buy in fully into security frameworks that say you really implement security based upon risk. And of course, you have to have safeguards. And one of the things I want to talk about today is how I think they've actually pulled it together now and have consciously worked to define real clear relationships between safeguards that they're recommending standardizing on and frameworks. And we'll talk about how they're related to each other in version 8.
Yeah, no, that's good. And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking as well, so many intersections across my own career. When you talk, I went to work in 1980 as I was teaching mathematics at college level. I taught at Smith College and Mount Holyoke College and a handful of far lesser well-known places as well, and made a career change, went to work for the MITRE Corporation back in literally the early days of computer security in those days. And for us, a big event in the mid 80s was the release of the first frameworks, the Orange Book on trusted computing based computing, and subsequently the Red Book, how do you build networks where you can't trust anything from anybody, but they're getting connected. And that of course predated the quote internet by several years, but we could already see it coming. And for the last 20 years, almost 20 years, I've been at the other extreme, working as an information security management consultant into mid-sized and smaller companies where, we've watched frameworks like CIS, like the cybersecurity framework, like the various Nist documents, first on security and now bringing together security and privacy. Some of that early stuff I worked on was in secure software engineering. And now Nist has really built a whole program around that as well. And so much of what I've seen as the challenge over my years has been to take this body of knowledge and how do you help organizations integrate it into their practices, into their businesses, when the motivation of the business is the motivation of business. We're here to sell services, sell products, whatever that is, earn a good living for our participants, our partners, our employees, whatever that is. And security becomes one of those need to do's, but only initially because, if we don't do it, we're in trouble potentially. Now it's become as well, we see competitive advantage in getting good at security, because it increases your profitability and it lets you take advantage of stumbles by your competitors as well. So looking at something like CIS Controls version 8 as it comes out, it just becomes a natural part of this, this whole flow of how do we, I mean, what CIS has done here is just, I think, it's a big step above where they were, which was in turn a big step above where it had been before that even. And this is the nature of our industry right now as we do that. So with that, Barry, I'm going to ask you, let's set the stage for the discussion. This is a discussion. It's not Barry and me talking to each other, but think of all 7 of us. Feel free to jump in with comments, questions, any of that. And we're going to jump back and forth from the formal slides off to the actual CIS document and look at some of that stuff as well. So with that, Barry, back to you.
Right. So these are the topics that wanted to talk about and include what Stan was talking about, looking at the actual details. Want to first review what are the CIS controls from a high level, and I'm going to go back and disappear on me. There we are. At a high level, how does it relate to frameworks? Initially, especially about Nist and a few others. We'll talk about that. The relationship between controls, safeguards, and risk assessments. That was the place I was talking about, because it seemed to me something that was beginning to come together in 7.0 or 7.1, but now they've done a really good job of lining them up. And then a detailed review of the implementation groups, the groups of what they now call safeguards that they're suggesting you implement based upon where you are and what are you trying to protect. And then we'll talk about the details of those things. We'll show them, and then finally where to find more information about the current version of CIS.
Oh, sorry, I just did something wrong. Hold on. There you go.
We can go to the next slide. It'd be great.
Yeah. I was actually looking. I don't have any slides made up for the version 8 alignment with the frameworks. I was wondering.
Well, there's a slide in here on that, as a matter of fact. So.
Okay, so here, yeah.
Well, if you go back to the previous one, the one, there we go. But yeah, we'll get to that. They actually put a lot of effort into it, and you'll see that. I mean, a lot of manual effort into this. But as an overview, when in 7.1, which was the previous version, there were 171 sub-controls. There were 20 controls. They were called the CIS Top 20. That's been now reduced to 18 top controls, and that's why. And they've got rid of the word top, so it's now CIS Controls version 8.0. So there's 18 of those, and you see them on that list there. And underneath those controls, they no longer have safeguards. They've standardized on the industry standardization name, calling them safeguards. So there are 153 safeguards in the controls version, CIS Controls version 8.0. And those are the counts that you see. Across the top there, just like they had in version 7, they broke them into implementation groups based upon how significant the security issue, the risk that you faced, basically. IG1 is implementation group 1, IG2 is implementation group 2, and IG3 is implementation group 3. One of the things that has been the case in the past, but it's clearly a thought that they put into 8.0, one of these significant changes, is that they have done they focused a lot on what was the importance of controls, and both across controls as well as with respect to the safeguards. So theoretically, control 1 is most important. Control 18 is the thing you would generally do last. But as you can see from the counts, 2 of the control of number 1, inventory and control of enterprise assets, which is primarily hardware. There's 2 of those for implementation group 2. Those 2 are included in implementation group 1. Those 2 are included in implementation group 2. So there's now 4 of them in implementation group 2. And altogether, There's 5 of them. One more was added to implementation group 3, where you're needing to deal with the most sensitive situation. And even going within them, we'll talk more about this when we start looking at the details, where Stan will be going through that list. You see that going down the control numbers and going down the safeguards from 1 to, in this case, 5 for implementation for control number 1, they're more and more important. So the first 2 are the ones that you'll see for implementation group 1, and all 5 of them for control 1 or implementation group 3. So they did a lot of work to standardize how they approach them, to prioritize these things. And in fact, in order to get down to implement to 153 safeguards, total safeguards, they actually combined some of them from the 171 that previously existed and added a couple of new ones. Those new ones include it was security provider management was one of them. That was one of them. They said, look, everybody's got to be doing this, and it wasn't clearly part of CIS controls in the past. But of course, that's part of each one of the frameworks. Nist has that built into a framework. And you see the same thing in all the privacy frameworks, that management of third parties, service providers, or vendors, or your supply chain is now part of what you have to worry about with respect to security. So this is one of the kinds of enhancements you've seen between CIS Controls version 8 from CIS Controls version 7.1. Mm-hmm. So this is the high-level view of what these controls are and how many of them are. And you can see, of course, only 56 associated with implementation group 1, and that triples by the time you get to implementation group 3.
Yeah, that's a good overview.
Next slide.
Before we move on, I think one of the things that's vital here to our way of thinking, particularly when we're working with smaller clients, is the emphasis on the first 6 as being very primary, if you will, in some ways. But then, of course, putting awareness training up to number 14, kind of, I'd move that up higher, perhaps, if I were to rank these in some order, just because of the need to prevent phishing attacks from being successful. I don't know. Do you have any insight into how they?
I think they've done such a good job. This is what we were discussing. When we reviewed them a couple of days ago. They've done such a good job limiting the span of controls in implementation group 1 that I'd be hard pressed to find an organization that shouldn't be doing all of implementation group 1. Now, and there are no controls for 18. There's no penetration test required in implementation group 1. And although there is a requirement to identify network and to implement access control for network and so forth, the specific requirement to do monitoring of network isn't there. But implementation group 1, I think they've done a really good job of honing in to all of them that every organization should basically have. It's called basic hygiene.
Yeah, and I think you're right that this IG1 group forms, if you will, that minimum basic security hygiene that every organization should be looking to implement. Yeah. Do you want me to go on?
We'll look at that. Go on, but we'll look at that more in detail as we review what they are at the end here.
Yeah.
Go to the next slide, right?
Do that, or just go to this. Yeah.
Yeah, this is good.
Yeah.
So, as I said, in the past, it seemed to me like the controls and sub-controls were good ideas, but they seemed to be independent of what was going on in the framework world, We got ISO 27001, you've got Nist 853 and so forth. And they were defining lifecycle processes associated with security and a broader set of controls or safeguards that one should consider based upon risk. So there was this potential gap between, do I implement just controls or do I associate it with risk? And if I was going to associate it with risk, how would I do that with CIS controls? I believe they started that in CIS 7. They came out with the CIS risk assessment methodology, but there wasn't any clear relationship between the CIS risk assessment methodology and the actual CIS controls. Now there is. But beyond that, they've also these are actual documents that exist right now. They're not done with these documents, but they're providing specific mappings between the CIS version 8 controls and Nist 800-171, CMMC, the Cloud Security Alliance Cloud Control Matrix, 800-53, and Nist CIS. Clearly, there's a Nist bias here that they're dealing with, but the fact that they've gone to the place of saying these controls don't exist by themselves, we're putting them in context of all of the frameworks, and we're telling you about how, where we've prioritized these things is really important, because now it's coming together, and they're doing a good job doing that. And these documents exist, and there's links at the end of the slide presentation where you can actually download the mappings.
Yeah.
Steve?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, I'm looking at these different, these framework names, of which, to be honest, I'm marginally familiar. I mean, I just know them by, I've heard of them. I haven't studied them. Is there what would be really helpful to me would be maybe a 2 or 3 word characterization of each. How do they play? I mean, how do they relate to each other and to the, the main focus of today, the version 8 controls?
Amongst these, Nist 853-5 is the godfather of Nist security frameworks. And from that, there are a number of subsets that were defined specifically for sectoral requirements. And that's my definition of how I see them breaking them apart. Nist CSF, you can speak up here anything you want, Stan, and correct me. My view of Nist CSF is that its goal was to come up with a more basic version of Nist 800-53 controls, but also to provide a well-defined definition of the life cycle of those controls. And in fact, you'll see later on when Stan shows you the CIS controls, they've also been aligned to the NIST life cycle names associated with each one of the controls. So they're really doing a job mapping these things. So there's 853 and there's CSF. And then along comes 800-171, which was a sectoral breakout of controls for DoD contracts. And then in the last year, and now it's live and kicking, there is the cybersecurity maturity model certification. The issue associated with 171 is that there were a lot of people doing check marks. And CMMC is a very formal security maturity certification, very similar to the Carnegie Mellon one, CIS, I'm at a loss for it. The information security, the level 1 through 5 security matrix for IT organizations. They're built on the same foundation. There's 5 different levels, and as you get to 5, you've perfected, not only have you implemented stuff, but you've got a repeatable process to keep them improved. So that's definition of maturity models. But the CMMC is also based upon, is basically taking 800-171 and putting a maturity grade associated with your processes to keep them up to date. And the Cloud Security Alliance Cloud Control Matrix is an industry association putting together controls to help define what you should be doing in cloud implementations. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. I think that's a good answer, laying out all of those. Very much so. The CSF, cybersecurity framework, is in some sense becoming the outside world's de facto standard, if you will. When you look at, in part it comes out of Nist. Nist developed it in response to a specific executive order from Obama to provide a framework. They built, of course, on 853 that was already out there, but I think they've done it in a way that makes the whole layout cleaner, if you will, the life cycle. And you've seen it, Steve: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. Yeah, that cycle, and then move that horizontally, if you will, through time, which is more what the cybersecurity maturity model concept is. We start, anytime we start a new thing, we do it in a very ad hoc way, but then you begin to build in, and this goes back to my early days in the 80s, when Carnegie Mellon came up with the first maturity model. In that case, it was for software engineering, but it's that same idea. You start ad hoc, you begin to manage it, you now begin to manage it at a higher level, you get metrics, and now you build continuous improvement into that model. And CMMC is kind of looking at that, at things in that direction, that integration.
I'm thinking about this book. This is how they tell me the world ends.
The world ends, yes.
And I don't want to go into that, but what I learned from that is, and I think we were all observing the cyber attacks are increasing and getting, the cyber criminals are more sophisticated. How do these frameworks adapt, and are they still, in other words, if we project out in the next year or two, are they adequate to keep us abreast and control and respond? Maybe the better word would be respond to the ongoing pace of attack.
Yeah, Barry, you want to grab that, and then I'll grab it?
I think that the value of these frameworks, and as well as ISO 27001, is that they're designed to last forever. They are designed to be self-improving frameworks from an organizational perspective, because they start from this concept: I have to worry about risk. And if the threats keep changing, then I keep modifying what safeguards I have to put in place to deal with the threats that exist today. That's why the risk-based models make sense, because that's what's really changing here is the threats. And threat times impact equals risk. So there's a way to calculate what is the issue here, what is the value to the organization, and one of the things that CIS did with CIS risk assessment methodology is they also included what's the risk to others of something that from a threat that I need to deal with. So they balance that out as well. So the answer is yes, they're designed to be lasting forever, because other than the CIS controls themselves, they don't specify specific safeguards. But the CIS controls, what CIS is doing is they're continuously evaluating what are the threats and how do we adapt the controls and map our approach to using these frameworks. So the answer is yes. The model, they understand threats are continuing to change. The frameworks are designed to support that, and the CIS approach is evolving the CIS safeguards to evolve along with the controls following these frameworks.
Yeah, I concur in that answer, but if you will, from a different direction, listening to your question, Steve, my direct answer to that is, holy gods, if we could get everybody to simply implement just whatever group level they're at with CIS and all, we wouldn't have had, I'm not going to say we wouldn't have had SolarWinds. That was such a deep attack they might have found some
Yeah.
other way, but we wouldn't have had Colonial Pipeline. We wouldn't have had,
Right.
CVS drugstores. We wouldn't have, I mean, and you go down the list.
Right.
Yeah.
For
Those
basic
things
hygiene
should not
problems.
have happened.
And
So
one
they're plenty
other
adequate. Yeah.
one other angle, I don't know if this is fair, but one of the things that, and I mentioned it in my introduction about what the laws that need to change, that for example, to opt in for privacy, and I see that that's have ramifications for the international community. So we should be learning from these frameworks and these attacks what should change in the law, so that it's there we could, for example, and I think of that in context of our president engaging Putin, and of course Putin denies anything. How I mean, there's a reaction that the world has to have to make these successful. If we have laws that at least establishes standards of behavior for an entity like a nation state, for example, how do you see these evolving and interacting with international law and national law? It's a tough question.
I think there are two paths to that influence behavior associated with security and privacy. What's fascinating about privacy is that it is basically a legal function. It's about compliance based upon law. While in Europe there is a view of human rights to privacy that doesn't exist in the United States, and even then, its implementation of compliance is based upon law. Security is motivated differently. Security really is motivated based upon risk, and insofar as a country we are threatened by outside risk, we will respond. And unfortunately, I think that the response is I don't know how we get to a place where it's acceptable to have cyber war, but that is the typical response to nation state attacks. However, both of them, when this is the fascinating part, both of them have a monetary impact also. And what I see happening in 2021, which is significantly different than 2020, is that insurance companies are beginning to respond to cyber attacks. IXA in France says we're no longer covering cybersecurity. No longer covering cybersecurity. You're now self-insuring. I just saw an addendum to a traveler's insurance cyber assessment where you have to agree to this to implement MFA for everything except for internal applications that are not run with not accessed with administrative privilege. If there's any application internally that requires administrative privilege, it has to have MFA in order to be covered by traveler's insurance, and any web-based application, regardless of who is accessing it, the user must have MFA. So that kind of activity is going to change behavior because there's real cost. If you're not insuring yourself, you can't assume that there's a safety net. You have to worry about that risk, and organizations will change because they will be impacted more. So I think there's two motivations to both security and privacy. There's a compliance requirement, but we know now, right? All you have to do is watch the adoption of California Consumer Privacy Act, and I would say more than half the organizations that are covered by it have not yet implemented CPPA. And now we're moving on to CPRA. But one of the things that's changing there is that there's a new organization, CPPA, that will go about enforcing the law. And I expect that the monetary impacts of that enforcement will motivate more organizations to implement more privacy. So I think that the security frameworks are really important. They tell you how to do what you need to do. CIS controls are a great way of helping to digest this without having to allowing somebody else to think about the threats, basically, and categorize them and give you safeguards for today. And they actually focus only on the top 5 threats that come out of DBIR. Mm-hmm. And I'll talk more about that as we move forward here. But the Verizon database of attacks, the report that's produced once a year. Mm-hmm. Was this another one?
Yeah,
great.
Yeah, this is new just came out last month. GAO study on cyber insurance that is now off to congressional committees, and they'll have a field day with it because we're coming to a break point. We're coming to a point where businesses need the legislation in part. Facebook is crying for regulations so they don't have to figure it out. Frankly, that's a cop-out. They don't want to have to figure it out. But, that's all part of what's happening. Stuart, you were going to say, yeah.
Yeah, I'm muted, Stuart.
Yeah, you're muted. Yeah.
Sorry. I worked on the Nist Cybersecurity Infrastructure Committee from President Obama's appointment. And one of the things that we talked about a lot was not making it too specific, but making it what you had to protect and not saying how you had to protect it, because that would change, and not saying what you had to protect it from, because those things would change too. But the strongest part of it was what things must be protected and why they have to be protected. The other thing is, you just brought up the insurance thing. When I was a CIO in healthcare, and when HIPAA came out, we ran out and got a cybersecurity policy. We had to buy our first one from Lloyd's of London because no US company had one. But eventually we were able to buy a lot less expensive policy from a US-based company. And they are the ones that made sure that we were complying with HIPAA. Every year, we had an evaluation of our policies and procedures. And about every 2 years, they would actually send someone into the office, and have access to the employees to find out if they were really following those policies. So, it's one thing to have them on paper, here's a procedure and here's the policy. But when an employee puts 5,000 patients' names on a disk drive and takes it home to work on, in all good faith, she wanted to do her work and was going to then bring it back in. So they made sure that those policies and procedures were being followed. And that's what made enforcement, that was stronger than the HIPAA law for us.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, good point. The other piece, I think, also is to your question, Steve, on the political side, and George here is our expert on that. There's an organization called the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace, and another called the People-Centered Internet, both of which come out of some of the thinking and work of Vint Cerf, the father of the internet. And you can read about them and link to them on the Secure the Village website, because I think particularly the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace has specific recommendations, suggestions, whatever, for governments, that how we need to interact in cyberspace, that includes, and this is how Secure the Village plays into that, part of that is securing the people, making sure people know what to do, that people are trained in security and privacy.
I would love to get a presentation on that. I'd like to understand that
Yeah.
better
Well,
because, I
Let's
mean,
not turn this into that, but let's plan for that.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, I go back to that book that
Yeah.
if you've read the book, this is what they tell me when the world ends. It should light a fire under us to
Mhm.
think about this committee that you referred to, this, the Vince Cerf activity, because and one thing that just jumped into my head was after World War II, we developed laws about genocide.
Mhm.
It was not something that we had laws about. We had international law now. This, to me, this is when we see the advent of international cyber crime. We
Mhm.
need to start thinking about international law and
Yeah.
how nations need to behave, so
Mhm.
that a mafia boss like Putin cannot get away with a simple wave of the hand that he hasn't helped.
Okay, so let me
I'll
just
stop.
move, yeah, because it's one thing to influence Putin and all of his cronies. It's another to say that that can't be our job right here, right now.
True.
We don't have that.
Sorry.
But what we can do is, okay, how do we protect ourselves in clear, obvious ways from the kinds of stuff that Putin's cronies are doing? And again, solar winds is solar winds. They come at us that way. Not every, our basic small businesses are not going to be prepared. It's not cost effective for them to, but there is so much that they can do. And with that, Barry, I'm going to give it back to you. What slide?
Let's move on to the
where do
next
you wanna
slide then.
go? Yeah, what's that?
Next slide.
Next slide, yeah. Yeah, okay.
Right. So there are a number of different pieces of information that I want to go quickly we can to looking at through the CIS safeguards. So there's a link to a page on SecureTheVillage to be able to get to the place to download the version 8. And you know, there's one directly there. But one of the things I find about the CIS website is that it's not really well organized. There's a lot more material there than is obvious on the surface. The next one is the CIS Workbench. It is the place where the communities that are focused on the individual components of what CIS is working on come together to discuss what should happen. So there's work groups there for the controls. There's a work group there for privacy. There's a work group there for the CIS risk assessment methodology, and they produce white papers, and all of those are associated with the CIS Workbench. And you can join this and get access to it very easily by going to the Workbench. The CIS Controls Navigator is a very visual view of the CIS controls, which is nice. And the last one there, the Community Defense Model, is significant because this is where, and they did it after the fact, but this is where they're saying they reviewed the controls and said, based upon the current Verizon DBIR and the top 5 threats associated with outlined by the DBR, these are how the controls map to those top 5 threats. So if you go across all of their materials, you see they thought through the relationship to threats. They've got the relationship to the CIS risk assessment methodology because of the community defense model. They've mapped the relationship to the individual frameworks. So they're doing a holistic job now of saying, here are our recommendations for safeguards related to all of this, and they're consuming it and digesting it for you. And it'll continue to change because the threats will continue to change. But I think, as you say, I'm more impressed now with CIS on version 8 than I've ever been before, because it looks like they're pulling it all together and it's logical, and they're making it very efficient, and they've got rid of individual items. They've grouped them better, and they've done a much better job overall.
Yeah, this is CIS Community Defense Model version 1.0. Have they updated this now for version?
Yeah, there's a 2.0 version. There's a 2.0 version, yes.
Perfect. I will download that very quickly. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
I think that's it. I think what we'd like to do, what makes sense now, is to walk through the controls and let's vet this idea of IG1 is basically basic hygiene, as they say, and every organization ought to be implementing IG1, and then move on and say, okay, so what should be and shouldn't be in IG2? How does that affect organizations? That's my view of where we are, but it shows you what is the content of this thing.
Yeah. So you're looking at, here's the various definitions of IG1, 2, and 3. And I have problems with this, frankly. I mean, I've always had problems with any kind of thing, because you're looking at the one side, you've got how big is the organization, but then the other side is what's the extent of the information they have that might be at risk, either to themselves or to others. And sometimes just because you're small without IT assets, strong IT assets, doesn't mean you don't have a lot of sensitive information. We have seen over the course of our company, and I'm sure you've seen it as well, Barry, and you, George, small companies, 5, 10 people, that their information systems might have private information of tens of thousands of people, or bank account numbers of hundreds of people. And so there's a large risk they've got, far more than their IT size can navigate. That said, think this basic hygiene, next level hygiene, even better hygiene, good, better, best, kind of that way. I mean, that's how I view this, Barry.
Yeah, I think that the other way of looking at these is, what are they trying to protect? Not who are they, but what are they trying to protect is what I think the most important definition in each one of these things.
Yeah.
And in this case, they're trying to protect low or primarily employee or financial information, IG1.
Yeah.
And IG2 says, no, you have to worry about more sensitive information, but you can withstand interruptions of service.
Yeah.
And IG3 says, no, you're dealing with highly confidential and integrated, and you have to worry about the integrity of sensitive data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, and I see that, but this is part of the pushback on what I see as the part of the challenge of making CIS real, because IG1 also talks about small to medium-sized companies with limited IT and cybersecurity expertise. But I'm concerned, because we have clients in this space, I'm sure you may as well, clients that are small to medium-sized with limited IT and cybersecurity expertise, but they still store and process sensitive client or enterprise information.
They can, sure, in which case they should be trying to implement some or all of IG2.
Right, with limited IT and cybersecurity expertise. And there's the rub. That's, and again, it's not so much as a, if you will, a criticism as much as an awareness of subtlety here, that you can't, I don't think, just take these, if you will, off the shelf as well defined and clear. I think you have to look at your own situation and kind of decide when you look at now the individual controls. And let's start looking at controls. You want me to
Yeah, right.
ahead
Yeah,
to,
please.
yeah. I'm going to jump to page 80, which lists them all. Here we go. So here we go. So here's 0-1 controls, inventory and control of assets. So there's 5 of these.
And you can see but there's only 2 of them. If you look at the IG1, there's only 2 of them. The first 2 that are included in implementation group 1.
Yeah, you can see that down. Here's the IG1, IG2, IG3. And so these first 2. And again, you've got the Nist mapping, the identify, respond, detect, and so on.
Yep.
And you know, what asset type are we talking about? Here we're talking about devices.
Right.
It's inventory and control enterprise assets. And it's, in some sense, it's basic. At another level, it's one of those things that so rarely is being done. I mean, if you're managing a fleet of cars for whatever your business is, you've got inventory control numbers on those cars. You know what they are, where they are, you know, everything about them, when they got to go in for maintenance and all of that. We walk into companies that are perhaps even IG2, and oftentimes their IT people don't know that inventory. I don't know, Barry, if that's your experience, or George, if that's yours, or Andrew, or Stuart, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, if you just look at 1.2, address unauthorized assets. This is
Yeah.
the mobile phone that's on the Wi-Fi network.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lots of organizations have that.
Mhm.
And this says you should at least be looking for it on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
But what's significant in my mind is that they're not saying today that for that organization, you need to be constantly monitoring the network for assets that are showing up. IG3. That's not part of, sorry, 1.3. That's not part of IG1.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. The fact of utilizing an active direct discovery tool, DHCP logging and things.
Right.
show up
Those are part of
higher-
IG2, but not IG1. IG1.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, the Active Directory tool can often be outside
Active discovery.
price ability. Yeah. So that's
Well,
one.
there's free active discovery tools.
Okay. What kinds of resources do they take to manage them?
Download it, you load it on a server, and you run it. It scans the network.
Okay.
Somebody's got to do it. But I'll tell you, I've been an advocate for a long time that regardless of the size of the mid-sized company, it's likely they should be outsourcing a lot. And that's where they get the economies of scale to deal with IT. I mean, years ago, there weren't MSPs, right? But they get the economies of scale for IT, they get the economies of scale for security, they get the economies of scale for privacy. So the question of how much outsourcing you need to do, in this case, you don't necessarily need to license anything, but somebody who can come in and scan once a week for assets is not a bad thing.
That's right.
Just having the device on the network, they can do that.
Mm-hmm. And again, going to this whole thing we talked about, Steve, it came up in some of the discussions we've just had around, you know, too many organizations don't know they need to do these things. And that need to get that out into the commercial sector is what's that's to me the big need.
And so it's education that's the challenge.
Yeah, I believe it's the ad council advertisements that say don't text while you're driving. Same thing's required.
Yeah.
But when I think about this, I'm looking at this for the first time, but I appreciate it. If I was a small business owner, this is overwhelming.
Yes.
It's overwhelming, and I don't have time to do this.
Absolutely not.
Even the big
But that
business.
doesn't mean you don't have to do it. You
Right.
personally may not have time, but
Yes.
there's a survivability. It's a risk issue. There's a survivability issue here.
Yeah.
Even medium-sized companies have to outsource a lot of this.
Yeah, right.
Only corporate giants are capable of having enough staff to do all of this themselves.
Yeah.
And even those, at some point, you flip over and you say, it's more cost effective for me to outsource specialized operational functions than to hire people to do that,
No,
because it's still not my core business.
we did a security assessment for the 5th largest bank in the world. And they didn't have the internal staff. And besides that, it's a better policy to have an outsider look at it and not the same outsider for more than 3 years in a row when it comes to vulnerability assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's
Why
the
don't you
same with us.
scroll
Yeah.
down through other categories here?
Yeah.
It'll get more interesting as time goes on, especially as you go lower. Because we had that conversation earlier in the week where we went through
Mhm.
all of them through 18,
Yeah.
and I think we both came to the conclusion that IG1 is a no-brainer for every organization. And, if you look at the hardest thing that somebody has to do, okay, 3, encrypt data on end-user devices, 3.6.
3.6, okay, yes. Also, an item 1, notice is protecting devices.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Again, should be a no-brainer. You do it once, set it.
Should
and
be a
forget it.
no-brainer.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know, Steve, for residents as well, that's part of your book.
That's
You know,
right.
Yeah, this is not just for businesses.
Yeah.
Protect the devices. Yeah. That's
Define data retention.
Mhm.
I mean, one way or another, because of legal concerns or otherwise, or just protecting data, you should have retention policies.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Same thing as we talked about, configuring data access control lists. Goes to the basic principle. People should only have access to the data and information and applications, et cetera, that they need to do their jobs. And having access control lists is how you manage that basic data protection scheme. Same with data inventory. I mean, I see this playing out in several ways. One, if you don't have a data inventory, you can't be sure you're always going to be able to recover from an incident. Because if you don't know what you got, right? Yeah. Oh, gee, we forgot to inventory. We didn't remember we had that, that kind of thing. But then again, the other side of it, if you're talking about PII, you need a data inventory when Joe comes along and says, I want you to forget about me.
Yep.
Stuart, you're muted again.
You can't do privacy without data inventory.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
a starting point.
Yeah.
And as you know, Stuart, a lot of organizations think they've done a data inventory if they're only doing structured data. You have to do a data inventory of your unstructured data also.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now,
To one of the other CIS controls is one you and I had talked about earlier, Barry. Again, this is an IG2. It's identify. It's users. Establish and maintain an inventory of service accounts. And again, it's got to maintain department owner, review dates, purpose, and so on, so that to some extent, if we're going to have, make that a little bit bigger. Well, I can't make it too much bigger. You can't see all of it, is the challenge. But again, we talked about this the other day, Barry.
Yeah.
And what's the appropriate level? And here it's IG2. I think at one level, even an IG1 needs to have a list of service accounts. Yeah.
I agree that there's all sorts of challenges of service accounts, those accounts that are used by applications to reach like databases and things. And one of the challenges I've seen with immature organizations is they use somebody's personal login to make that happen. And that person disappears, or the password changes, it stops functioning, or you don't know where that login exists throughout the organization. That inventory is pretty important, even for smaller organizations. But the flip side of it is that you'd say that they've excluded that inventory from IG1. It's like, well, okay, you may need it. And I agree that's a really, really important thing to do. But it also implies that almost anybody should be able to do IG1, even for account management.
Yeah. Well, again, and that goes
Restrict
to,
administrative privileges to administrator accounts. It's like, hello.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And this again, I mean, all of these, and this goes, Seema, I think it was you who asked this earlier, maybe it was you, Steve, around, just the applicability of all of these and where they ought to belong, and that there's no slam dunk answer to that. That this going through and deciding for a particular company, what's appropriate for them. And again, it goes back to Steve, this is not an exercise for the CEO, but the CEO needs qualified subject matter experts, like
Yeah.
those of us in this room, in part, to be able to do this.
It comes down to the digitization of information is a new world that it's immature. It's within our lifetimes that it's initiated and evolved.
Yeah.
And maybe it's going to take another lifetime until it becomes as reliable as physical bridges or some other paradigm that has existed for hundreds of years, centuries, and millennia that we rely on.
Yeah.
I make the analogy with a physical bridge. Physical bridges now we don't think twice about crossing, but we're now thinking twice and three times about using the internet.
Yeah. But,
I don't know. I saw the physical bridges in Chicago, and I wouldn't cross many of them.
Well, and my thinking, Barry, when I heard Steve say that was, yes, but these bridges still need maintenance. Isn't that what it is?
Yeah, right.
All of that, that kind of thing. So let me go up to another one of these. That very
go to 6, because 6 they've introduced MFA.
Yeah. Okay. So here's 6. There's 8 sub pieces. What are they called again? The sub controls.
They're safeguards. They're safeguards.
Safeguards. And 5 of them are for IG1s, including MFA for remote network access, MFA for externally exposed assets, and certainly for administrative access.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me ask because I talk about this when I lecture to residents about the differences between MFA approaches, and from something like a YubiKey to just a 6-digit code that's sent over an SMS network. I'm surprised this is as general as it is. Why isn't it specifying, for example, a time-based one-time password as opposed to an SMS? In other words, it's leaving that open to risk.
Well, I think the answer is this is the first time they put MFA in there. The vast majority of people don't use MFA at all, and any MFA is better than nothing.
Okay, on that we agree.
Yeah.
On that we agree. But I'm
They also,
already.
by the way, they also require 15 character passwords.
Wow. See, but to me, it isn't. It's the second factor, the 2-channel approach is more important, more powerful, more valuable
no doubt.
than the length of the password. Well, I mean, what's going to happen when we have quantum computing, when the hackers have a quantum machine that can crack any password within 5 minutes?
We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. This is where we are now. What was it Rumsfeld said? Somebody, you go to war with the army you got. You defend your systems with the systems against the threats that are out there now.
But
And I'll leave it to Nist to work that deeper problem, if you will.
We know that credentials are for sale on the dark web.
Right.
And given that, if your password can be 50 characters. If it's for sale on the dark web, it's irrelevant.
Mhm.
So, you know.
So MFA is a good idea.
Yeah, right. But again, you see, and jumping back to Barry's point here, because I completely agree with him. The fact that we've even got it as one of the, not just one of the safeguards, three of the safeguards, is a step forward.
Yes.
And we are never going to be at the final step. Barry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, and I would agree with anybody who says MFA is annoying. It is annoying. I live with, I can't tell you how many different MFA accounts I have. It's totally annoying. But every organization can do it. And ultimately, every person can do it.
Yes. And yet, this is one of these stories that as long as I stay working, I hope I never forget. Sitting in the office with a law firm, nice size, West Side LA, high-priced attorneys, where the partners said, we do not want MFA. It's too much of a burden on our users. And sure enough, one of the partners had his Office 365 account hacked, and $40,000 of money went out the door. So you tell me, you're going to spend a few dollars a month and go through a little bit of pain, or are you going to, I mean, that's all right. So there's
or are you going to live without a cyber insurance policy?
Yeah.
That's the same arguments as you get into with regard to time for commute versus doing everything by Zoom in COVID times that have gone forward. There's a study that's just come out on the amount of time that people spend shifting between either Zoom GoToMeeting or their other cloud-based applications. And remarkably, it looks like it corresponds incredibly close to the 1 to 2 hour average commute time for going to the office. It's the amazing finding of this recent study. So if you then add to that the overhead of MFA, I don't know what ratio you'd want to add for jumping applications, just jumping easily without any security or very minimal, or having your password filled in for you by your browser, which has got to be one of the most amazing negative security developments ever put in by the browser developers. That's got to be the most serious flaw. And the fact that everybody uses it instead of the yellow sticky note next to their computer to write the passwords on.
Yep. But that also goes again to another Barry, your and my big interest is on reasonableness of controls.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at, let's take a situation that you've got PII of other people to protect. And if you look at the burden to the organization of implementing MFA against the risk to your customer base of not implementing MFA, I don't want to suggest it's like not having a gate around your swimming pool, but it's like not having a gate and a fence around your swimming pool. There's a liability there.
Right.
It should be
There's a liability there.
Automatic.
And this is, again, the really great thing about cloud outsourcing is that companies are inherently like that law firm, transferring that risk to their service providers because they're picking it up on their behalf, which actually means they're ignoring it. And they may or may not be covered by any kind of insurance.
Yep.
And they may or may not outsource to the same jurisdiction stack that lines up with the company that's hired them to deliver whatever cloud services, be it any one of the big guys for the compute or the storage part. And if they're very smart, they've probably separated just those two between two different major cloud service providers, and they've completely transferred all of their processor server process access risk to one, and then they transfer their data access risk to another one. that's the optimal configuration for the owner removing themselves for the responsibility of their data. And that's essentially what everybody's done with telecom carriers who provide their access services to their smartphone, and then the data that they keep either for their personal picture collection on their phone or out with their preferred picture and media capture area. And that's actually the biggest vulnerability these days, because it paints a full geo footprint of everybody. And then you add their actual web wanderings of clicks on the internet, which is generally available, and you can basically produce a complete map of anybody, their personal, their enterprise, and all of their cloud involvements. And you've done that all with publicly available network routable traffic. And all you have to do is look at the addresses, not even any of the contents. If you have access to all the contents, by decryption or quantum computing or whatever level you happen to be at, you have the entire picture now.
Right. But yes, and
you've never
I'm
had
looking
to
at the clock.
and you've never had to have any, and
Yeah.
you've never had to have
I have a
any.
recommendation
Yeah.
that we're running out of time here, but one of the things that people ought to do is take a look at these controls as you've done. You get the links are available on the SecureTheVillage site. If you search for CIS, you'll see all sorts of documents associated with. And there's one of them there that says, the CIS controls 8.0. Or I'd be happy to send slides to whoever wants them as well.
Yeah.
But it'd be a good idea just to look through these and compare what we were doing. Look at the hardest one in each one of these categories. Like, oh, by the way, the hardest one in section in Control 7 is implement automated patching. It's like, hello. I mean, I don't know how you do it anymore. When I was VP of IT at Barnes & Noble 20 or 30 years ago, I said, we can't test everything. It's about patching and restoration, but automate this stuff. Let's get it done, and everybody can do it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we are running out of time. Good discussion, everybody. I want to thank you all for this, and Barry, mostly I want to thank you as well for taking the time to put all this together. I know you and I are very similar in some ways, that we kind of grok this stuff. We love it. And as you get into the reasonableness, which is yet another dimension of exactly the same problem, which is risk management. You look at like what Bob Zukas is doing at the Digital Directors Network, with looking at systemic risk as a very specific aspect of risk that way. This stuff is not going away. Someday, it won't be in my lifetime, I don't think. I don't think the field's going to progress that fast. But it'll be likely in my children's lifetime that we will have quantum computers on the desktop. And that changes the whole ball game, because the algorithm space now becomes very different. But until then, we've got, here we are, where this is the 2020, 2021 version. 2022, we'll see when, of the Center for Internet Security Controls. It's a moving target. The cybersecurity framework is a moving target. CMMC is a moving target. ISO also moving targets. As we begin to implement the kinds of technologies, Andrew, that you're talking about, and as that works its way down from the enterprise down to the small businesses, because again, who was it that said the future is already here? It's just not equally distributed. The Bank of America gets to spend $1 billion a year on cybersecurity, and I have clients that it's really a struggle for them to spend a couple of $1,000s a month on cyber. So I mean, the space is that wide. So I think we've kind of wrapping it up. Any final quick comments, because it's already 5:31?
I have more compute power and storage in my iPhone than on the 360 computers that I first started working on
Yeah,
40,
Yeah.
50 years ago.
yeah, yeah.
So it's just going to get bigger and better. And all the data that's on here, if I don't protect it, it's at risk.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
360 data wasn't at risk at all. It was all on tapes that never left the building, and it wasn't connected to anything outside the building.
that's right. And when I went to work for MITRE, we were right in the middle of that shift. You know, we had what was it, the PDP-11 with terminals hanging off of it.
Yeah.
And we finally had, when I got there, actual email communication with this company up in Canada that we were working with, and with Spawar in San Diego, what is now, whatever the Navy group is there, but back then it was the Navy Spawar. That was it. It was
I'm
very
really
different.
curious, Stan, who was the company up in Canada? It wouldn't have been TRM by any chance, would it?
No, a company called IP Sharp.
Ah,
in
really?
Toronto. You know them?
I worked very closely with them, and
Okay.
they actually ran the collective bargaining simulation system all in APL for the Treasury Department. So Treasury Board, who was responsible for all collective bargaining, and I took the application off the mainframe at IP Sharp over to a bunch of compact computers where we had the complete pay structure for the entire Canadian government stored as a data set so we could run simulations on it. It
Cool.
paid for the migration in the first month by the improved settlements that they could come to with the unions based on that additional modeling and simulation capability.
That,
I'm gonna
that's
have to
cool.
jump off. I
That's
have a 6:30 meeting at
Got it.
6:30 to 8 and an 8 to 9 meeting. So,
So go
okay.
for
See
it.
you next week.
Well,
We'll see you later. Thanks, everybody. Barry, again, I'm like so grateful for
always a pleasure, Stan.
all you do. Yeah. It's a pleasure back. Seema, great to see you.
Thank
Hope
you,
become a
yeah.
Regular. Next month.
Great
we're-
discussion.
Good. I'm glad you did. And we certainly want more talks on privacy. That's another area where I know we want to move.
There's a
more
separate group on
aggressively.
privacy, Seema.
Okay.
That's cool. Great. Thank you all. And we'll see you all for the next of these again. So,
All right, great.
Talk later.
yeah.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Have a good evening, all.
Bye.